Good morning. How's everybody doing? That is the sound of folks at the end of 3 days of drive, I think.
I feel like we need a little more caffeine in the room.
Hey, have you guys had a good experience here over the last couple days? Has it been good? Awesome. Anybody willing to just be honest and say, you know what, I am empty, I'm running on fumes this morning, and I may fall asleep in this breakout. Anybody? We got some honest people in the room.
We're going to do our best to keep you awake, okay?
We will try. We will try. Well, this is Group Leader Essentials, and we want to welcome you. It's the final breakout of Drive, and I also want to say a big welcome to those of you joining us online. We are glad you're able to join us, and got an opportunity at the end of our time together for you guys to join in on the Q&A. So thanks for joining us online as well. So,
you guys a little bit jealous of the people online? They're home in their pajamas right now with a big cup of coffee.
That's it. And they can fall asleep, and we won't even know about it. If they fall asleep during this breakout, they're absolutely good to go. So again, this is Group Leader Essentials. If you're not supposed to be in this breakout, you need to be in another one. We got some staff that can direct you to where you're headed, where you're supposed to be. So, well, again, we're glad you're here, and I think we're just going to start out by introducing ourselves. And Sue, you kick us off.
All right. Well, thanks you guys so much for being here. This is so fun for us as a staff. I hope you guys realize that as you've gotten to interact with all of us. But we love being here. But my name's Sue Bates, and I'm the director of women's groups down at Buckhead Church. That is our campus. That's about 15, 20 miles south of here. And I've been on staff for almost 10 years. And I have spent most of that time training and coaching our women group leaders. So a lot of what I'm going to share with you today, I've gathered from just sitting across from leaders day in and day out.
My name's Adam Johnson. I've been on staff since 2008, and I work with married and men's community groups here at our North Point campus. And my wife is also on staff. She works with the women's groups, just like Sue. She works with the women's groups here at North Point. So our whole family is bought into community groups, and it's something we're passionate and really, really excited about. And I know that many of you may have gone to some previous breakouts that deal with groups. You may have been in the Q&A this morning. And what we're going to do over the next few minutes is we're going to kind of focus on the leader and our interactions with a leader, because we really believe that a great community group hinges on the quantity and the quality of our community group leaders. You know, what happens when that door closes and it's the leader and that group that's meeting together in the home. So we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about that, and we're going to dive right in. You've got the notes in front of you in your book. And we really believe that regardless of where you are in the life of your organization, whether you have been doing groups for years or whether you're just starting out doing groups, that this first point is something you got to keep in the front of your mind at all times, and it's this. It's that leaders need clarity. Leaders need clarity. Now, Andy talks about this to our staff on a consistent basis. He also speaks at different leadership conferences all around, and he talks about this idea that the tendency of every organization, especially churches, is to grow more and more complex over time. And the same can also be said of our messages and our interactions with our leaders, that over time, they can become more and more complex if we're not really intentional about keeping things clear. You think about it, if you're, when you were just starting out doing community groups, some of you are in this boat right now, you're just starting out doing community groups, the things that you ask of your leaders are very simple and straightforward. It's like, will you just show up? Because your presence at group would just be a big deal. I mean, that would be a win right there if you would just be there. And Sue and I talked about it when we were working on this this breakout today. We talked about in the early days of North Point, we would sit down to interview a leader to see, hey, does this person have what it takes to lead, or you know, are they meeting the expectations we have? And we'd sit down and we'd kind of be like, okay, let's see, do you have a pulse? Oh, okay, great, we'll take you. All right, come on, step right up. But so that's the idea. On the front end, things are it's easy to be simple, it's easy to be clear with leaders. But then, as you get several years into doing groups, as you get into year 5, year 7, year 10 of doing groups, you've gained a great deal of experience, a great deal of knowledge, a great deal of information on what works well in groups, what doesn't work well, and what leaders need to do on a week in, week out basis to make their groups great. And if we're not careful, if we're not really, really intentional about staying clear with our leaders, we'll try to give them 10 years of experience in one conversation. You know, we'll try to communicate everything we've learned about groups on the front end of them before they ever step into leadership the first time. So letter A under number 1 there is that leader development needs to be clear, not comprehensive. Leader development needs to be clear, not comprehensive. Before I came on staff at North Point, I was in sales, and I sold surgical equipment. which meant that I was in the operating room. I was in surgery, talking to doctors day in, day out. And I worked for a company called Stryker, and we had like 4,000 different products that we sold. I actually had a buddy of mine send me the product guide just to kind of show you. I mean, it's just pages and pages of product. And in fact, the one from several years ago was about 2 times. It was like a phone book. And I remember they shipped me off to training a couple months in, and we spent 2 straight weeks, all day, every day, learning about all 4,000 of these products. Now, a question for you. How much of that do you think we actually retained at the end of those 2 weeks? Someone said 5%. That's really low. Maybe it was 5%. Probably 25%. I don't know. 25, 30%. The reality is once you get home and you get back in the flow of life and you're hanging out with the kids and the family and doing work and everything else, like you probably end up within 2 or 3 weeks forgetting the most of the things that you retain at the end of the 2 weeks. But see, what they were trying to do was they were trying to give us a comprehensive message. And what we believe is that we really need to be clear more than comprehensive. A couple thoughts underneath that. Number one, an exhaustive message exhausts a leader. An exhaustive message exhausts a leader. When people step into community group leadership, most likely they've got a lot of other things going on. They're adding community group leadership to an already full plate. I mean, leader types, people with the kind of the desire to lead, are most likely involved in a bunch of different things. They're involved, obviously they have their jobs, their families, but maybe they're involved in their kids' sports. Maybe they're involved in the community in some way. A lot of the leaders are involved in other parts of your organization. I know for Sue and I both, our leaders serve in Wambaland. They serve in Upstreet. They lead a transit middle school, small group in addition to their adult group. A lot of them serve on Sundays. So they're doing a lot of different things. They only have so much mental capacity and so much that they can take. And so when we sit down and we think, hey, the community groups that they lead are really the only game in town for them, and we try to give them a comprehensive message, it only serves to exhaust them. So an exhaustive message exhausts a leader. Number two, leaders learn on a need-to-know basis. Leaders learn on a need-to-know basis. And back to my days at Stryker in surgical device sales, they spent 2 weeks training us. But what would happen is we'd go home, we'd forget the majority of what we learned, and then like 6 months later, I was standing in the operating room, and the surgeon, he's in the middle of the case, and he just turns and he says, hey, do you guys sell an arthroscope? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Yeah, we sell one. And then I would walk out of the operating room, and I'd pick up my phone, and real quick, I'd call marketing, or I'd call a rep that maybe has been with the company for a while, and I'd be like, hey, do we sell an arthroscope? And they'd say, yeah. And I'd be like, good. That's good, because I just told a doctor that we did. What is it? What does it do? How does it work? What do I need to tell this guy when I go back into the operating room? And in that moment, I would learn what they were trying to teach me 6 months earlier in training. Because leaders learn on a need-to-know basis. The same thing's going to happen in your community groups. Your community group leaders. You may sit down with them on the front end and you may teach them each and everything they need to know about group. But what's going to happen is 5 months later, 6 months later, a year later, that something's going to happen in their group. They're going to bump up against something in their group. And they're going to remember, I think maybe they taught me about this, but I can't remember what they said. And they'll end up picking up the phone and calling you and saying, hey, I've got this issue in my group. Can you tell me what it is? And in that moment, they're going to learn it, because leaders learn on a need-to-know basis. Number three, too many essentials create confusion and hesitancy. Too many essentials create confusion and hesitancy. When we give leaders too many things to think about, they get stalled. It's kind of paralysis by analysis. I like to use the analogy of pool water versus lake water. When I was growing up, I grew up right here, about 20 miles away from here. And I love going to the pool. I love diving into the pool all day long, front flips, cannonballs. I mean, I was free to jump in a pool. But then you take me to a lake, I stand on a dock, and I'm like a foot above the water. I mean, the water's right there. But I'm hesitant to jump in because I just knew that there's like some dead tree or some nasty thing like hanging up just ready to receive me when I jump in the water. So the muddy water created a hesitancy in me. And the same thing is true of our community group leaders. When we give them too many things to think about, too many essentials, they get in there and they go, okay, wait a second, was I supposed to do this first or that first? I can't. And it just creates a hesitancy in them from moving forward. So again, we want to be clear and not comprehensive. Letter B, being clear on fewer things sets the leader up for success. Being clear on fewer things sets the leaders up for success. Number one, clarity empowers leaders to move forward confidently. It empowers them to move forward confidently. This ties into what I was just talking about with the pool water and the lake water. When you give them clarity, it's like you're setting them in front of a pool. I mean, they can see in, they see that it's 10 feet deep, there's nothing in my way, I'm free to just dive in. And leaders are, for the most part, people that step into leadership, they have a get-it-done mentality. Don't they? Isn't that true of most of the leaders you come across? That they just have this high responsibility, I want to get it done. They just need clarity. So when we give them that clarity, they feel free to move forward and get it done. And number two, clarity ensures completion of the most vital tasks. Clarity ensures completion of the most vital tasks. Each leader that you have that steps into leadership, each leader that we have, has a capacity. They have a limit. They have a ceiling of what they're going to be able to accomplish. So if we come to them and we say, hey, here's 10 ways to make your group great. Some of them are going to be able to do 4 of them. Some of them 5. Some of them maybe 6. But the reality is every one of them is going to have a limit depending on what's going on in their life at the time, depending on their personality wiring and just what's going on in their story. They're going to have a limit. So, but we look at it and we say, well, okay, well, if they're going to get 4 or 5 or 6 things done, it doesn't matter how many things we ask, right? If we ask 10 or if we ask 7 or we ask 12, like they're still going to get 5 things done. They're still going to get 6 of those things done. But the reality is, if we give them 10 things, anything less than 10, and we can't guarantee that they're getting the most vital things completed. We would all agree that if we handed 10 things to a leader to do, that we would say, some of these things are more important than others. There's some things on this list that are actually more vital to the group. And that if you miss those, the other 6 or 7 don't really matter. And so being clear on fewer things greatly increases the percentage chance that they're going to knock out the things that matter most when it comes to creating a great group. So we try to be clear on fewer things and set our leaders up for success that way. So what I want to do right now is I want to get this kind of down to a practical level and let Sue and I both share how this practically plays out. This idea of clarity plays out in our role on a normal basis. So Sue, tell us how, when working with women's groups at Buckhead Church, you've seen this idea of clarity play out.
Yeah, great. Some of what Adam's talking about is a matter of timing. Because those 10 things that you want a leader to do or a leader to know, they may need to know them at some point. But what they need to know at the beginning to start their group well, and what they need to know in the middle, what 3 or 4 things to get them through a rough spot or build some momentum, and what they need to know well to finish well or to really multiply your group and have an apprentice that's prepared to lead, that's going to be different. It's a matter of timing. For me, when it comes to Group Link, which is our event where we connect people into groups, I want to get as many leaders as possible at our event because I want to have as many group openings for all of our group seekers. So when it comes to Group Link, I will interview someone up to kind of the 11th hour. So if I have Group Link on Friday night, I might interview someone that morning, maybe that afternoon, or certainly the day before. So I'm going to keep interviewing and have as many leaders there as possible. So when you're sitting before someone who's brand new, who's never stepped into leadership, and within 12 hours, they're going to step into an event where they have hordes of people trying to get into their group, you can't overload them. You can't inundate them with all the things they're going to need to know over the next year or two to lead. You just need to narrow down what you're going to tell them. For me, when I'm sitting before that leader, and especially if they're brand new, I tell them 2 things. I said, listen, you've got to do one thing well for your leadership to really thrive, and that is you've got to be fiercely protective of your relationship with Christ. You need to make sure you're spending time with him. You need to not let that go by the wayside. For a brand new leader, that's something that they haven't really grasped as well. They need to know that their leadership flows out of their relationship with Christ. And then when it comes to their group, I say, listen, tomorrow night you're going to meet a group of women, or for the men, you're going to meet a group of men. You need to work on building relationships with them. That's all you need to focus on those first few weeks. Now, I'll circle back with them in a month later or 2 months later. We'll talk about some more things. But those first few weeks, you need to work on building relationships. You don't need to worry about what curriculum you're going to do. You don't need to confront them on their sin those first 2 weeks. You need to just make deposits into those relationships. And for you yourself, you need to make sure that you're spending time with God. Just focus on those two things.
For me, I tell my groups, I say, hey, try to, in the first couple weeks, call the people out on their sin. If you can do that, no, I'm just kidding.
That's men's groups.
Yeah, that's right. No, for me, the way it plays out is I just think about in the same situations, right before group link, or even in my first couple meetings with leaders, I try to narrow down. We have 8 leader essentials that we kind of live by here at North Point. Many of you have probably seen them. They're available at groupleaders.org, which that website's in your notes. You'll see it at the end, so you don't even need to write that down. But we have 8 leader essentials, and I really boil it down to 2. I take 2 of those 8 essentials, and those are the ones I kind of stand on the first couple times I meet with a leader. And the first one is think life change. And this is the idea that kind of the overall vision of groups, and why we have been, from the very beginning of North Point, we have been a church of small groups. And it's the belief that to grow spiritually, you must be connected relationally, that life change happens in the context of relationship, in the context of community. And so I want my leaders to understand that. So they know that the environment they're creating week in, week out is really the heartbeat of North Point. That yes, we have a really big Sunday morning service, and Andy's awesome, and the band's awesome, and all that stuff, but really the heart of the church and the heartbeat of the growth that's happening in the church is happening in the circle that you're helping create week in, week out. And then the second is much like what Sue said, focus on relationships. Cultivate relationships. If you can focus on, getting people to know one another and beginning to deepen those relationships, it's going to open the door to a lot of awesome life change in your group. So that's the way I kind of narrow down the focus and bring clarity to my leaders.
Great. Well, we want to be clear with our leaders of what it means to be highly effective. So we want our leaders to know, and this is number 2, that leaders need character and competency. There's a passage in Scripture in Psalm 78, and it talks about David's leadership. And it says he shepherded them with integrity of heart and skillful hands. And so that's that character piece, is that integrity of heart, and the skillful hands, that's a competency piece. That is a thread that we have communicated to our leaders over and over again, really since we started doing groups, that we want to develop them in those 2 areas. We want to develop them in their character, and we want to develop them in the areas of competency. But we know for a new leader, especially coming to the table, that there's sometimes a lot of confusion around that. They don't know what that means. So we've learned kind of the hard way sometimes that we've got to be really clear on what that looks like. So we've actually captured some of those things here today. Some of the confusion and the myths that our leaders have and they come to the table with that they think that are important for leadership. And then we want to share what the realities are that we want our leaders to embrace. So these are all in your book, I believe. We're going to kick off starting about myths about character. And Adam, why don't you lead us off there?
So the first myth about character is that the church is responsible for my growth. The church is responsible for my growth. So this is the person that, every time your doors are open, they are there. And anything you offer, they're going to be a part of. And that's a good thing in a lot of ways. Because these are the people that are volunteering and helping you kind of push the mission along. But the kind of the downside, the negative side of this belief, of this myth, is that when there is any kind of gap in their spiritual walk, it's the church's fault. And when there's anything negative going on with them spiritually, they want you to create another program or another department or something else to kind of help them grow in that one area. And the reality is great leaders lead themselves. That's what we look for in great leaders. We want someone that's going to lead themselves. We want someone that, if our church evaporated today, that they would wake up tomorrow and they would be hungry and desiring to grow, and they'd be looking for different things, different relationships, different resources that are going to grow them. We use the term self-feeder. It's not a great term, but we look for leaders that literally are in all the different areas of life. They're feeding themselves. They're seeking out different ways to grow in their relationship with God.
Next one is my personal life is separate from my leadership. This is especially challenging, especially important for your new leaders to understand. Because a lot of them might be coming from a place where they're leading in the workplace. And they think, hey, what I do in my personal life has nothing to do with how I perform at work. But all of us here in this room know when it comes to spiritual leadership, when it comes to ministry, that those are one and the same. That you can't separate your personal life from your ministry. And so we want leaders to understand that influence comes from an alignment between what I say and what I do. I've learned kind of the hard way. When I sit down to interview a leader, I have a very clear conversation about what it means to be aligned in what I say and what I do. I want them to understand that their good words can't compensate for bad behavior. And so I've learned you've got to be explicit over implicit here, that they understand that their influence comes from that alignment.
Next one is it all depends on me. And this is the idea that if life change is going to happen in the group, it's my responsibility. If it is to be, it's up to me. And the reality is that life change ultimately comes from God. We want people to have a healthy expectation that all they can do is help create the environment. And, they can pour effort and energy and time into this, but they can't make life change happen. That's ultimately God's responsibility. And what that does is if you can set the expectation for a leader in that way, they are free to do what they can do. They won't get discouraged along the way if they don't see life change happening. And then if they get to the end of the group and they say, well, wow, it doesn't seem like anything really miraculous happened, they won't think it's their fault. They'll say, well, I guess I can sign up and do it again, and we'll see what God does next time. So you just create that expectation that life change ultimately comes from God.
Or the next myth is, I have to be perfect. All of us here in this room know how exhausting that is. And it creates a space between the people that you're leading to put up that facade and to hide all your imperfections from them. And we all know, being in ministry, that effective leaders are going to lead with vulnerability. That's the reality. Effective leaders lead with vulnerability. So as a group leader, and especially for those of you that have a lot of group seekers coming and people that are really new to following Christ or being in any kind of small group, their leader feels like, hey, I've got to act all perfect so that they'll model their lives and their behavior after me. And while it's great to have a role model, we don't want them just change their behavior. We want their hearts to change. And that's going to happen when the leader's willing to be transparent and open and vulnerable.
Last one on character is that I need to know a lot about the Bible. This is probably one of the most common ones that I come across when I'm talking to a potential leader, someone that maybe a friend or another community group leader said, hey, you should lead group. And they're kind of not sure, and I get on the phone with them or I meet with them in person and grab a cup of coffee, and we begin talking, and really their main hesitation is, hey, I don't have a seminary degree. I don't have any kind of official Bible training. And what I want to communicate to them in that moment is, look, hey, it's more about your heart than it is your head. It's more about your heart than your head. What I mean by that is what I'm looking for in a leader is somebody who has a heart to grow in their knowledge of Scripture and to invite some others along with them in that journey. Do they have a heart to grow in their knowledge of Scripture? Do they have a heart to grow in their relationship with Christ and a heart to invite some others along with them in that journey? Because that's going to create a great group experience. In fact, that's a lot better than the guy who comes to me and says, hey, I've got 2 Bible degrees and a seminary degree, and I'm working on my PhD, and I'd love to get in your group and start teaching some people some things, okay? It's like that. That's not what we want in our community groups. We want somebody that has a heart to say, hey, I'm not there yet, but I'm on a journey, and I have a desire to grow, and I have a desire to help lead some other people in that same direction. So it's about your heart and not your head.
Well, just like there's some myths around character, there are also some around competency, and we're going to dive into those. The first one is, it's my job to teach them the truth. Back to a little bit of what Adam said, a lot of our leaders that are coming and they've got, a great grasp of the word, and you've got people in your group that are brand new to that, and they want them to know Jesus. They want them to know, what God says that's true about them. Then it's so tempting for those leaders to just want to just dump a bunch of information on them and teach them and kind of get them up to speed. But we know you can't microwave spiritual growth. And so you've got to lead people in the right time to the truth. And so that's the reality for leaders. We want them to know that it's their job to lead them to the truth. That means they need to be better question askers than information givers.
I think of the Bible answer man. That's like the tendency for people is if they're really mature in their faith and they come in and a lot of the group members are brand new to the faith, they just become the Bible answer person. In group, everyone's just asking them questions and they're giving them the knowledge. Next one on competency is I am responsible for the group. This is the idea that anything that has anything to do with the group, I'm responsible for taking care of. So I got to make sure that emails are sent out. I got to make sure that I'm hosting every week, and I'm going to make sure that snacks are set up, and I'm going to make sure the study's done, and I choose what study we're going to do. And if we're going to do a service project, I'm responsible for that. I'm responsible for setting up the social. And as you can see, as I'm talking, I'm beginning to get tired. So the reality is that effective leaders delegate responsibility. Effective leaders delegate responsibility. This is actually one of our 8 leader essentials that you'll see on groupleaders.org. We call it promote participation. We want our leaders to promote participation, to find capable members within their group that they can hand things off to. They can hand different responsibilities of the group off to. So you have somebody that's handling emails. You have somebody that's setting up the social or the service project. You share the hosting responsibilities of the group. And what that does is it really accomplishes 2 things. One, it frees the leader up to do what they do best and what their main job is, which is to come into group and facilitate that conversation and generate conversation through great questions. And then the second thing it does is when you give something to a group member to do, they have buy-in to the group. They feel like more of a part of the group when you give them something to do. And so it just creates an overall better group experience when leaders delegate responsibility.
I always want one of the responsibilities to be that they clean my house before.
But
I haven't got anyone to buy into that one.
You haven't delegated that one yet.
I have not delegated that one yet.
Room for growth.
Or wash my car.
Room
Yeah,
for growth.
there we go. All right, the next myth about competency is we celebrate big life change. You know, I think for all of us here in the room, we understand being in ministry day in and day out that a lot of it happens in the little things and that little nudges that we see God moving in the lives of people and really in our own hearts. You know, for our leaders, sometimes they come to the table and they think, you know, I'm not doing a great job because no one's gone into the mission field and no one got baptized and no one's enrolling in seminary. And so, you know, I'm a failure and no one's, you know, memorizing whole passages of scripture and they feel like there's nothing to worth celebrating. But we all know that's not true. And our leaders need to know that that's not true too. They need to know that we're going to celebrate any life change. That means, you know, when a person comes into group and says, hey, you know what, after our conversation last week and about stewardship, you know, and what I do with my time, I went and had a conversation with my boss. And I told him that I can't put in the hours that I've been putting in because I need to be home with my family and they're my first priority. That is something worth celebrating. That's as big as celebrating as someone who goes into the mission field. And, you know, I had this happen recently to a leader, and she called me. She was so excited. And she said, listen, group's been going great, and I was going to be gone and out of town, and I was going to cancel group. She said, and then this person kind of raised her hand that barely says anything. She said, well, I think I could lead through group next week. She goes, and she did it, and it was fantastic. And, you know, that's the lens that we want our leaders to have. We want them to be able to look at every little nudge, every little push that God does in the hearts of their group members and celebrate that.
If we can get our leaders to have that mindset, there's going to be a continual stream of motivation for them and encouragement. You know, because if they're waiting for the big story and it doesn't come for 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, maybe even the entire life of the group, you know, gradually they're just going to become less and less motivated. But if there's things happening week in, week out, and they're noticing the small things, they're going to continue to be motivated.
And they'll stick around.
Yeah.
Which we want to happen.
Next one, it's all about the curriculum. And you know, I get asked often by my leaders, hey, what's the best study that we should do in group? Is there a great curriculum out right now? Or what's the best study on marriage? What's the best study on parenting? What's the best study on spiritual growth? And what they're really asking in that question, kind of the question behind the question, is what's the silver bullet study? You know, what's the study that I'm going to bring in and literally everyone's just going to fall out on the floor and just encounter God in a brand new way? And what I always remind them of in that moment is that, hey, remember that there is no secret study out there that's going to change the life of your group. In fact, group is more relational than it is informational. Group is more relational than it is informational. If it was all about the information, if we had the magic study, we would just bring thousands of people in and just give it to them, you know, in the auditorium, or we'd send it out in an email and say, hey, here are all the answers. Here's the study that's going to change your life. But we don't have that. And that's the importance of group is connecting into those relationships. And so that's what you have to continue to cast vision to your leaders about is, look, you got to take whatever study you're doing, whatever book, whatever curriculum, whatever sermon series, and find a way to weave it into the lives of the people in your group. Keep the focus relational and not informational.
And the last one is group only lasts 2 hours. And this goes back to what Adam just said, you know, about the relational part of community. We want leaders to understand that community is developed continually. And this is an expectation that you'll need to set with your leaders from the start. Because if you're sitting before someone and, like we talked about, these high capacity leaders that have a lot of things on their plate, and their understanding is, hey, I've got Wednesday night free to lead a group, then they're not going to be available for the community that needs to happen outside of group. Because as we know, the questions and the problems that come up in groups messy. It doesn't just happen for 2 hours on Wednesday night. That's a part of it. But often the momentum that you're going to get relationally, and really a lot of the ministry that a leader is going to be part of, is going to happen throughout the week. So you've got to understand, leaders need to understand that they're coming into it. It's really beyond the 2 hours of group. What does community look like?
No, yeah, we got it up there. Yeah, community is development.
Here we go.
Sorry. So again, 5 myths on character, 5 myths on competency, and we didn't just pull these myths out of the hat. These are things that honestly that Sue, myself, the other directors encounter on a regular basis. And there's actually many more than just these 10 that we've listed. And in fact, a lot of the myths we'll come across that a person's been leading for 8 months, 10 months, a year, and in one of our meetings, one of our interactions, we'll find out that they hold to one of these myths. I mean, they're good in a lot of areas, but all of a sudden, oh, wow, you believe that. And so we really think that success is moving leaders from those myths into the category of reality. If you can move them from those myths to believing the realities, you'll really begin to see them become highly effective leaders.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about encouragement and equipping. Number 3, leaders need to be systematically encouraged and equipped. You need to have some kind of framework for encouraging and equipping your leaders. For someone like me, that I like to operate pretty organically and intuitively and just kind of see, okay, how do I feel about that? And, when's a good time to do that? I miss opportunities to encourage and equip my leaders. As good as you might be, as good as I might be at listening to how the Holy Spirit leads me and saying, okay, this person needs a deposit here and this person needs a deposit here, unless you have a framework, you're going to miss opportunities. I'm a runner, and so when I go out, in the course of a week, I'll knock out 3 or 4 miles a few times a week, and that works great. That comes very easily, very naturally to me. But if I decide I want to run a marathon, I've got to put a framework in place that's going to allow me to hit 26 miles, because my 3 or 4 miles isn't going to do it. So as good as you might be, as naturally as it comes, and I'm not necessarily a natural encourager. Some of you guys might be great at that. The words might flow out of you. You just might think in that with that lens. But unless you've got a framework to equip and encourage your leaders, you're going to miss allowing them to really hear what they need to hear at the right time. So the questions you want to be asking are, what are my regular touch points for encouraging my leaders? And what are my regular touch points for equipping my leaders? A regular encouragement must be part of any leadership development system. Regular encouragement must be part of any leadership development system. There is a steady leak in everyone's encouragement bucket. There's probably a steady leak in all of ours, and we know what it looks like to go through a season where you don't feel valued and you don't feel encouraged. Your leaders need that same kind of encouragement. And for those of that doesn't come naturally to, that means you've got to figure out what it looks like for you to almost exaggerate your encouragement. Have any of y'all ever done a public speaking class? They're painful, aren't they? Sometimes. And they tell you that you need to speak very slowly, and you need to use big hand gestures. And it feels so uncomfortable, doesn't it? You feel like you're exaggerating, and it looks so weird. Although it feels weird right now with my hands. I don't know what to do with them. But it feels so weird. But the person that's sitting across from you, they don't think you're talking slow, and they don't think your hand gestures look weird. It feels exaggerated to you, but to them, it feels really normal. Well, you need to think through encouragement with that as well. When you're encouraging someone, you need to over-exaggerate. You need to be over the top on it. I've never sat before a leader that said, Sue, you encourage me too much. It just doesn't happen. So you over-encourage your leaders.
And this is one thing, too. I mean, we're giving you a lot of content today, and a lot of you may already be thinking of leaders that hold on to some of these myths. And you'd be like, well, I can't wait to get back and tell them, try to get them to move from this myth to this reality that as staff and as volunteer coaches, when we sit down with leaders, really what's on our mind is I want to train this person up. I want to get them better. I want to help them, kind of fill in the gaps where they're lacking. And so if we're not careful, we'll take every opportunity we have to meet with them face-to-face and make it a coaching session. But then after a while, they get burned out. And again, that steady leak of encouragement, they're going to get pretty worn out. So we just have to be really intentional about saying, you know what, I'm just going to hit the pause button on coaching for a few minutes, or maybe for this meeting, for this entire coffee that I'm having with this person, and I'm just going to focus on encouragement.
Yeah. You know, one of the best ways that we found encourages our leaders is to connect them to our vision consistently. Every opportunity that I have, every opportunity that we have, we want to leverage so that our leaders understand for our vision and our mission to happen here as a church, you're not only necessary. I mean, we can't do it without you. I want, when I sit before a leader and I have coffee, on Sunday mornings, you know, from the stage, during baptisms, during my trainings, every chance I get, I want them to understand that for us to be a church, to reach the unchurched in Atlanta and to lead people in a growing relationship with Jesus Christ, then we need you to be part of it because you are our mission. You are part of the leadership of this church. So every chance that I can to encourage them, I want to connect them to our vision consistently. And the second way that's been just incredible for our leaders as in terms of feeling encouraged is to connect them to each other. And this is something, I'll be honest, that I really didn't value as much in the beginning because I was forgetting that here I was, I'm working you know, every day, day in and day out, I'm rubbing elbows, I'm getting encouraged and working with people that are on mission with me. And I'm sharing, I'm hearing what's going on with Adam's groups or with one of the others directors groups, and I'm talking with challenges for them. And so here's this group of people that I'm, you know, traveling with. And I was forgetting that my leaders, they have other jobs or they're at home with a bunch of kids or whatever it is that they're doing. And so they're not rubbing elbows day in and day out with another group of leaders. They don't even know that there's other leaders out there. And so they can feel like an island. And so the encouragement that they experience when they get in front of another leader, really, I just step out of the way and let them do their thing. It's really remarkable.
Yeah, the importance of this principle, I see it every time I get my leaders together. Sometimes I'll do multi-leader meetings on a Sunday morning where I'll invite 5 or 6 married couple leaders to come together. We get a starting point room and just sit on the couches and we'll just talk about what's going on in the group. We'll talk about what's working well and what's not really working well. And literally I'll have some stuff planned, like I'll have notes and questions asked. And I mean, once it starts, I literally don't have to say anything. I mean, they'll go back and forth and ask questions, and they just love being around the other leaders and finding out what's going on in other groups. It's a great practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Keeping your leaders together.
And you know, I work with a lot of singles leaders. How many of y'all have a bunch of singles leaders in your group there? Oh, we got a few of you. Good. Okay, this is just to you then. Hey, listen, when you've got singles leaders, they love to be together. So to not leverage that, I mean, that is one of the things that, honestly, I could just open the doors and send them all in, and they would have the most encouraging night. And so you've got to take advantage of those times. Just putting them in the room, you don't even need to be there almost. They will love being together, and they will be so encouraged. And honestly, they do a little bit of equipping back and forth to one another as well. All right, let's talk about equipping. Be effective equipping is both corporate and customized. It's both corporate and customized. You want to train corporately on your basic leadership skills. You know, there are some things that every one of your leaders need to know. Whether it's a starting point leader, married, single, if they're a brand new leader, if they've been around for 10, 15, 20 years, there are some basic leadership, some fundamentals that all of your leaders need to know. And when you figure out and identify what those irreducible minimums are, you can get them all in a room and train them all at once. Or you can give them all the same information. They all need to know those things. So train corporately on your basic leadership skills.
And one of the ways that plays out for us is groupleaders.org. I mean, it has really served as the avenue through which we get a lot of our corporate training out. I mean, our initial group leader training used to be a live event, and now it's a series of 8 videos that they will watch through groupleaders.org. We also have a blog post on there. Every blog that we post is really deals with issues that every group is going to deal with, not just specific drilled down issues. And then there's a handful of other tools on there. So it's really become our corporate avenue, if you will, of training leaders and keeping things in front of them. The things that apply to all group leaders, we just put on groupleaders.org.
And you guys can get onto that, right? They can get on groupleaders.org. I think it's so you guys can tap into that if there's a bunch of blog posts about different things. And so feel free to share and use it as much as possible. So number 2, while we train corporately on our basic leadership skills, we want to coach individually on the distinctions. Coach individually on the distinctions. For those, how many of you guys are parents of more than one child here in the room? We've got a lot of parents. Okay, you guys understand this principle. This is for Adam. You guys understand this principle a lot better even than I do. There are some things that you parent the same for all your kids, right? There's going to be some things. It may just be that you feed them all the same food. Whatever that looks like. There are some things that you do the same. But when you get to know them and you get to understand how they're hardwired and how one of them responds to discipline and the other one doesn't respond to discipline, you start to adjust how you parent them, right? And you parent this one maybe a little differently than this one.
We actually have twin boys, identical twin boys.
Not we.
Yeah, not we. No.
We do not have.
I'm sorry. My wife and I have
Kelly.
twin boys, and they're identical, which means they have the same exact DNA, and yet their personalities are totally different. And I mean, they're only 3 years old, but I can already see how this is going to play out. Like we're going to have to parent them differently as they grow up because they're totally two completely different people.
Yeah, and same with your leaders. All leaders aren't created equal. So when it comes to developing them in terms of character and competency, you've got to be able to coach individually in that, which means you need to coach to the gap. You need to coach to the gap. When I sit before a leader, some of them have incredible character, and that's been developed their whole lives because they've grown up in it. But when it comes to what it looks like to lead a group of people, that might be new to them. There are others that comes so naturally to them, but the idea of spiritual leadership is really new, and so I've got to coach them in that area. A few weeks ago, I met with one of my leaders. Her name's Emily, and she is just fantastic. Brand new leader, and just so excited about these groups. She's got a group of women that I don't think any of them have ever been in a Bible study. They've never been in small groups. Some of them hadn't even been going to church yet. They just went to Group Link and got in a group, right? They've been watching online. They never even attended our church. So she's so excited about that. But she grew up in the church. Her parents were actually church planners, so she knows more about ministry than probably I'll ever know. But when I'm sitting before her, she said, I'm so excited, and I want to know about, Jesus, and I want to just give him all this information. And she's just been dumping scripture and information on him, and they're just blank stares. She just, nothing from him. And so we just talked about what does it look like to dial that back a little bit and not be so far out in front of them that they can't even see where you are. That's not what a great leader is. And a great leader is just far enough out in front that they can see you and following your footsteps. So for her, we just talked about, hey, there's just one thing I want you to do. I want you to ask more questions. And we talked a little bit about this earlier. I just want you to ask more questions rather than telling them a bunch of information. And, and when it comes down to, when you get past training corporately your leaders and you get down into coaching them, it's not the most efficient thing, is it? It takes a lot more time. But if you want your leaders to be highly effective, you've got to be willing to coach them and coach the gap.
And that's really what we want. I mean, the goal for all of us in here is to have highly effective leaders. I mean, we want the SEAL Team 6 of community group leaders, in our churches, leading folks in community week in and week out. And we really believe that if we give leaders clarity, and if we encourage them both in their competency and in their character, and if we have a system that delivers encouragement and equipping on a regular basis, that we will lead them towards being highly effective leaders. And so we've given you a few things to think about. What we're going to do now is we're going to bring a couple folks up, have some Q&A, and hear from you as well. So coming up to the stage right now, we have Elaine Scott, who's been on staff for a long time. How many? 15 years? 16 years? 17 years? I think she was the 7th person hired at North Point Community Church.
She was like 12 when she started.
Yeah, that's right. And then we also have Steve Giddens, who is from Buckhead Church. He's actually Sue's boss, so be careful, Sue,
what you say
on stage.
Here, I got your water.
Thank you. Great job, guys. That was awesome.
So these are two veterans in the group world, and we would love to just hear from you. We've got a couple mics in the room, and we'd love to answer any questions you might have.
Guys, I'm going to kick it off with a question from an online viewer in
Awesome.
St. Augustine, Florida. And the question is, how often will you meet with small group leaders, and what are some of the resources for developing your leaders?
Steve, are you on?
I'm on. Elaine, do you want to take that?
Okay, the question was, how often do we meet with small group leaders, and
Correct.
what are the resources available? Typically, in a normal year, what I say, the baseline is we'll meet 3 times. We meet every trimester or so with leaders, but with a new leader, we may meet more frequently than that because they're new, and we want to make sure they stay well coached and that they are getting the equipping that they need. And Adam and Sue did a great job talking about resourcing them. Groupleaders.org is phenomenal, and it's only getting better. They are continuing to add resources to that. But also, as you work in Groups World, I mean, we've got books available to them, creating Community for Change, or whatever that one's called. That one is called. But there's lots of great resources out there available, and as you do this more, you learn kind of what's good, what's not good, what's better. But as Sue said, you coach to the gaps, so you have to figure out what those gaps are. And that definitely helps you refine and tweak what resources you might make available to your leaders.
Yeah, for brand new leaders, we used to do a new leader training for all of them and do that live, and we've actually taken that online, and so our leaders get a password and log in, a brand new leader, and so they can go on and go through that at their own pace, and then as a groups director, I can kind of track with them to see where they are, and so they're able to just, get that information at their own time.
Yes, I can relate a lot to the pulse, just looking for people with a pulse as a church planter, a little over a year into it. But I guess in your context for back in that mode for you, instead of now, I would imagine now you have more of a plethora of people that will come to you and volunteer, and you'll have to interview them and so forth. But going back a little bit in the archives, did you find that you had to tap more people on the shoulder that you saw the leadership potential in? Or do you see that it's a good mix between both people coming up to you and you tapping, or you kind of begging people to lead?
That's a great question. Do we find the same challenges in recruiting leaders? And I would say yes, across all of our campuses. In 5 Atlanta area churches, some are a little newer than others. Down at Buckhead, we still have the challenge. I mean, we have new people that are coming to our church, and they need group leaders. The only barrier we have to providing a spot for someone in a community group is an available leader to lead. And I think these guys said it great. Vision leaks. So we have to continually remind our leaders that, hey, we need you thinking of someone in your group who has the potential to lead. What they're learning in your group, they're learning how to lead. A lot of things get more caught by watching a leader than taught through any training we could provide. And so we have to continually do that. When we have building campaigns and we open up a new building, that's something that is a physical, tangible expression that we did this. We created this building so new people can come. When we don't have that, we can tend to settle into maintenance mode, and we have to keep that vision in front of people that, hey, just a reminder, we had a group link, and we didn't have enough leaders for people that want to get into a group. We continue to want to do this. So we continue to try to find ways. The groups director model that we use, those touch points repeatedly 3 or 4 times a year, it helps to keep that fresh.
And another thing to keep in mind on that is that, and Andy talks about this in Deep and Wide. If you haven't read Deep and Wide, it's a phenomenal book. And he says, even now, currently, where we're at right now, today, we put people into leadership before they're ready. He said we still do that. And so it's definitely a tension to manage as far as quality, quantity. Where do you draw the line? If you draw it too high, you got nobody leading. You draw it too low, you got some pretty wild groups going on. And so it's definitely a tension to manage. But err on the side of, hey, sometimes we put people in the leadership before they're ready.
Question as far as leadership, do a lot of these resources on the website, do you apply them to student ministry as well? Do you find that you need to provide different resources, or are there enough of those general competencies that you see bridging both gaps? Because I'm in the student ministry world, I'm training, my main job is to train small group leaders to work with students, and I'm just wondering if you have a different resource list for them, because obviously there are some cultural differences, age differences, but what's universal and what's different?
Yeah. I think some of the principles can apply. I would say the resources that we create are written with the target audience of an adult small group leader in mind. So some of the principles may apply the way we do student ministry. Small groups are a big part of it. It's combined with a large group time. So there's large group time, and then they break into small group time. Our leaders, our adult leaders, are doing all of that together, themselves. They're introducing the curriculum, they're asking questions, and they're doing prayer request time. They're trying to draw people out. So the target audience for all of our resources are adult small group.
In our high school teams, they get together and they plan everything from the worship to the talk to the small group. So they're actually writing the curriculum that the small group leaders are going to ask immediately after the message is given. So they're kind of controlling all that. Whereas in the adults world, we have groups meeting in homes all throughout. It's really up to the leader as to what they're going to study and what they're going to do next. So some things that are a little bit.
I was wondering if you could, under the resources, talk a little bit about the leading gray and what that consists of. I've not heard of that.
Could you repeat that again? Sorry.
Yeah, under resources here, it says Leading Gray is a 90-minute training event for community group leaders. Can you address what that really entails?
Leading Gray, it's one of the resources I think at the end of this section in your notes. It's a training that we did a couple years ago. I think it's probably, the feedback we received from that training was one of the best that we've had. And what we did at our trainings, a lot of times, our leaders just say, we just want to get together with other leaders and talk about best practices. So what we did is we put them at a table and gave them an issue, a group issue that could surface in a group. It was more of a gray issue. It wasn't a black or white. There's not a verse you can point to in Scripture and say, well, this is clearly the answer to it.
Or there's verses on both sides.
On both sides of it. And so we said, and we had a staff person facilitate the conversation. And so it was a gray issue. And many of the times, as these guys talked about, in the one-on-ones, you're coaching on a gray issue of how do you handle this? How do you invest relationally up front so that you can make a relational withdrawal and make a challenge to people that are in your groups? So that's a little bit, and I think the link that it provides you probably gives you a bit more of information about that. But
yeah, we actually pulled scenarios that we had as groups directors encountered in at least one of our leaders, and so we really pulled from them, and then we handed them to all the leaders and thought, hey, this is a great talk about learning on a need-to-know basis. This could happen in your group. This has happened in groups, and so we want to see how you guys navigate that and start to learn how to go through those challenges.
Okay, when you have more people that are wanting to get into groups, like say you have a group link event and you have 100 people that are wanting in groups, you have nowhere to put them.
Every time.
What do you do with those people? I mean, how do you handle them moving forward? Well,
every time we have that. At least at my campus, every time on our women's side, we have more people that want to get in groups than we have group leaders for. And first of all, it's a great problem to have, really. If you're going to be on one side of it, hey, I love that there's more people and that they've bought into our vision and that my senior pastor does a fantastic job of encouraging people. They all want to do community. We have people come that, never been to church, and they say, I'll get in community group. So we always have that problem. And so, we haven't always handled it well. I think sometimes it doesn't go as smoothly as we'd like, but what we have done is we've said, hey, if you come to Group Link and you want to get connected, we know there's a huge value in you being connected relationally. We want you to have a spiritual leader. Ultimately, that's what we want, but we know there's a huge value. And so if you come and say, I have 100 women that don't have leaders, we will go ahead and form them into groups, of 8 to 10, and we'll say, listen, you're going to be what we call a formative group. And here's a guide, and this is going to walk you through your first 8 weeks. We don't want you guys to leave here and not to be connected. So these groups, these formative groups, they leave Group Link, and they're connected to one another. And we have a guide that will walk them through the first 8 to 10 weeks of their group. And in that guide, it will help them as a group kind of vet their own leader. It'll say, hey, this is what it means to lead. We think there might be someone qualified in your group that could lead. And so we would love for you guys to consider that. And so from that then, often someone will go ahead and apply for leadership, and then we'll go ahead and interview them, and then they'll be back into our process. And so that's what we do with them. And we love to have enough leaders there, but that at least gives sometimes there's someone in there that just hasn't had that nudge, and so they'll step up and lead.
They think they don't know enough about the Bible.
Right.
Jim Hake from Journey Christian Church. Just on your point about myths about competency, and the statement being that it's all about the curriculum, whereas the reality is it's about relationships. What I've discovered is at least I believe I've discovered, and a group I'm working with, is that there really is a connection between curriculum and relationships. And if you're trying to promote relationships, and we all know it's the 3 vital relationships that we're trying to promote, and so I think what I want to do is emphasize a point and then ask you guys a question about this. When you're looking for curriculum, you're not just we all know we're not just looking for something to plug and play. We're looking for something that produces something. And I know what we're trying to do, in the group that I'm with is trying to select curriculum and recommend for small groups, is to promote those 3 vital relationships. We want something that transforms people, and if we can, put them through a cocoon experience, to really make some change, life change. And I just wondered if you all have a process or a system for doing that, in terms of, because we all know that people are in a different place on their spiritual journey, and Is there something that you do that you would recommend that we could do about that?
And are you specifically asking about curriculum, like how we lead our leaders as they choose curriculum? Is that the question?
With respect to promoting life change, with respect to, really using curriculum, not just for information. I mean, this point has been made over and over and over. It's really not about the information. Right. It's about what kind of impact this has. What kind of change does it produce in somebody? How applicable is it to their lives?
Elaine, do you want to jump on that? How you lead your leader students?
Well, I mean, I think, one, I rely upon my leaders' feedback. I think all of us probably learn a lot. We have 50-plus groups going on. They're doing a lot more curriculum than we're personally doing. So it helps for us to listen to what has worked well and been successful in existing groups from leaders that are maybe more seasoned leaders, that are more skilled in the art of facilitation, who are honestly the kind of leaders that could take a bad curriculum and still make a great group experience out of it. So I think part of it, all of us would say, is we listen to our leaders and we listen to their feedback. I think another factor in consideration of choosing a great curriculum would be, where is your group at? Where is your group at in its life cycle? Because as you know, there are things that you should not do in the first year probably that you can do the second year. For Women's World, I mean, the one that comes up all the time is Beth Moore studies, and things like that. Well, in the first 3 months is not the time to do a Beth Moore study. They're very intensive and very involved, I guess is the best way for me to explain it. So I would think there's just wisdom in trying to think, what are we trying to accomplish mainly in the life of our group those first few months? And we would all say the first half is we want relationships. So we may choose something intentionally that's maybe lighter on theology or lighter on homework to enable the group to really develop relationally. Or having good questions is what I would think. Do you guys want to chime in on that a little different?
I think so. I think that's a great guide. When it comes to, I think part of your question was, curriculum can really guide the conversation in a group, and it totally can. I mean, it can help load the bases for a leader in facilitating the discussion. One of the things in coaching our leaders on the married side, in the course of an 18-month married community group, you may only do one study on marriage. But we hope that couples in the group don't only talk about their marriage in the 8 weeks of that particular study. And so we guide our group leaders to separate husbands and wives out at the end of the time for prayer request time, or things like that, where you can begin to surface what's going on in your marriage, what's going on in other areas, and not just limit the facilitation or the discussion around that particular topic that you're discussing in a curriculum. And a good curriculum helps particularly new leaders, learn to ask great questions and see the benefit of asking great questions. And tough curriculum can make it all the more tough for leaders too. So we work really hard to vet that.
Yeah, I think we've got one over here. Yeah, go ahead.
Referring back to the student ministry a little bit, I do lead a group with junior hires, and as far as the group goes, do you do the same thing with those as having the same kids meet in the group for an extended period of time, or do you mix and match? Or they always develop in cliques usually. But do you let that happen, or how do you manage that?
In the student ministry, their big goal is they want the students, if they're going to know one thing, have one consistent experience in their week in, week out thing, it's their small group leader. So even from the production side standpoint, like we have different worship leaders every week in Transit and Inside Out. They have different people speaking every week, Transit and Inside Out. They have different people hosting each week in Transit and Inside Out. It's our middle school and our high school ministry. And the reason is because they don't want their friends, when they're walking in, they're bringing their friends to the group, they don't want them saying, hey, we can't wait for you to see this guy speak or this guy sing or whatever. They want them to, the only thing they really know about what we're about to walk into is, I know that Tim's going to be there. He's my small group leader. And they want them to connect like that. So that's the way our student ministries do groups.
And if at all possible, when you're coming on to lead either middle school or high school, they will ask that you come in at sixth grade and be with them up through eighth grade, 6th, 7th, and 8th, and then maybe hand them off. Now, sometimes we have leaders that move up with them, which God bless them. That's phenomenal to be true. But can you imagine the legacy to meet someone when they're 12 and then go with them until they graduate? So, but same with our high school leaders. Then they come in at 9th grade and they want to. It doesn't always happen, but we would love to see them track with them all the way up until they head off to college.
And there are a couple folks in the back who are part of our student ministry. This room is used for student ministry. So if you look for one of the ones in the Drive T-shirts, how they connect people into groups, you could ask them as you leave. There's some of our group staff that are in the back too. So if you see the Drive shirt, you could say, hey, are you a group staff member? I have a question. Or hey, are you a student ministry staff person have a question.
We got our last question from online.
Last question, Mark in Lubbock, Texas. Can you speak best practices to ending or branching out groups?
That's great. I would say, so the question was about obviously ending groups. I think one of the biggest keys to ending a group well is starting early. I mean, when you first get the group together, cast the vision to the leader of, hey, you need to let your group members know that there's an endpoint in the future, that we're not meeting until death do us part, but we're going to strategically multiply our group in a year and a half or 2 years. And we're not saying goodbye forever. We're going to remain friends, but we're going to strategically multiply so that we can open up seats for more people and have greater influence and invite other people into community. I would say that's one of the most important things, is to start early with that. Anything else you guys would add on that?
Yeah, I think especially with the women's side, Elaine would agree with this. We tend to link arms and feel like, hey, these are our best friends forever, and we can never, ever break up. But for them to understand the legacy that they can have if they are willing to multiply and invite other people into the incredible community they experience, that's the point that you want to jump off of.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank
We've
you
got
so much.
one last session of Drive.
We'll be
Thanks
here.
to all you online. And we'll be up front if you want to ask us questions. Thanks.